While the host of Sisters in Arms have taken every precaution to ensure that the content of this program is both current and accurate, errors can occur. The hosts assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omission in the content of this program.
The information contained in this program is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantee of completeness or accuracy. The opinions of the guests are not necessarily the same as the hosts.
Welcome to Sisters Arms. I'm Kerrie Ann Auclair.
And I'm Renee Gagne. Together we serve as a Second Amendment resource for our communities.
And this is part 2 of part 1. And so, again, Mary Forgues and Martin
Podsiad.
Sure, why don't we go with that?
We're going to go with that.
That's fine.
So, welcome. So some of our guests probably don't know you. If you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Martin, I'm 16 years in law enforcement, currently detective in major crimes. Most of my career I spent working in intelligence or plainclothes work, and a good portion of that was around what most people would consider gun crime, gun trafficking. I was at one time assigned as a task force officer to the ATF.
And Mary?
So I always say I do a lot. So as a career, I'm an emergency dispatcher. So previously I did police, fire, and medical, now just police. I'm a single mom with 2 teenagers. I'm a small business owner, and I'm an advocate for Women for Gun Rights, previously known as DC Project.
I will get used to that new name.
Excellent. Well, it's not every day we have folks from Connecticut drive in for our show, so we have about 27 minutes to get as much in as we can.
No, we can do it. We can do it.
We can do it. We can do it. So we'll start with Martin. Okay. One of the biggest questions a lot of people ask, or actually they don't ask it, they just assume that when they call 911 because there's a problem, that a police officer is going to be right there at that very second that they need them. So I want to talk about the response time for police officers.
Sure. So that response time, I mean, we have to take it one step back. I grew up in an era of landlines.
Oh,
Okay, so that's something people don't think about.
How about the
Correct. We did that too, right? So you call 911, you hung up the phone, or if the line was open, they knew what address to come to because that phone number was registered at that particular address. So we don't have that anymore, right? Now we have to try to triangulate and ping, and I'm sure Mary could, could talk about that. It's something that she does. But just the actual how the call happens, right? You have to open up your phone now, right? Get to that 911 thing, dial it, it starts ringing. Now, I can tell you from Connecticut, and I'm sure anywhere else, the way the cell phone towers work, it could go to an adjoining town depending where you are. For us, a lot of times it goes first to the state police, right, depending where you are. State police will say, what's the address of your emergency?
and then they put you on hold.
Then they put you on hold, correct. And then they try to get some information and then try to get that department to start to respond there. So there's definitely just a lag in the phone communication itself, right? As good as it is, technology is great, but there's a lag there. Now, that call taker, depending on what department you're in, you could have a separate call taker and a separate dispatcher. I believe in yours, you're the call taker and the dispatcher.
And the dispatcher.
A little bit better because so you have a call taker, that call taker takes the information and passes it on to the dispatcher. Now that dispatcher has to relay that. So it's a game of telephone, right? That's time ticking. That whole time that's happening, right? That's time ticking. I always say that the most important thing to get out, first and foremost on any 911 phone call, is where you are.
Right.
We don't care what the problem is, tell us where you are. Because if that line goes dead, at least we know where we're going.
Right.
So there's that. Now you're dispatching this cop. Now a lot of people, it's kind of funny, I work in the city, and I always say that working in cities is safer, right? People are like, oh, wouldn't you want to work in the suburbs? I'm like, no. And I'll tell you why. It's the same thing as a civilian. I've been in trouble as a cop plenty of times. And when I got on that radio and called for help, I could hear the sirens, and it felt like it was forever. All right, and an average response time probably in my city of a cop getting to you, if you need help, is probably within a minute, 2 minutes. Well, if you live out in the suburbs, depending on how big your town is, you may only have 2 or 3 officers on, period. And depending where they are, what their particular response is going to be to that call. So there is no average. You can't look at a national average. Nobody could pinpoint one because it would be completely inaccurate. Right? You would have to go town by town. That would also be dictated by what road closures you have, what the weather is like, right?
And what's going on
Correct.
at that very moment.
Correct. What other
that
things
you need help.
Yeah,
right.
Correct. So all those things will dictate response. So honestly, that response could be 30 seconds, and realistically, it could be 15 minutes. I worked on a case up in Maine, up in Penobscot County, and I worked with a sheriff there, and I asked him, like, hey, what's the longest you ever waited for backup? He's like, about an hour.
Oh.
Yeah. So
Yeah, you're in the
who
middle
knows?
of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's not as quickly as people think. It's not the movies, right? Like, boom,
Right. Well,
cops
that's
come.
what it is. Everybody thinks it's like the movies.
It's not. I do agree with the saying that we're not first responders. Rarely, right?
You mean the
secondary.
police are not.
Correct.
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
We are our own
Citizens are.
responders. Yeah.
And we
first
could take that
responders.
even further. Paramedics are not first responders.
Correct.
If my kiddo was choking, I don't have 6 minutes
Correct.
with no air getting to the to the brain. So you need to know your CPR. You
Yep.
need to know how to stop a bleed.
Tourniquet, yeah.
These are things that you can't wait for help to come. It could take
Use
too
an
long.
EpiPen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So, I can't say. I'm just going to tell you, it's going to be a lot longer. When you need help. That response time, no matter how fast it is going to feel like it's forever.
Right.
I will say, as my experience as a dispatcher, so right now I do only police calls, but I still receive 911 medical calls, 911 fire calls. We're supposed to ask for the address, then verify the address a second time, ask for your phone number, ask for the phone number a second time, what's your name the second time, you're verifying everything, and then tell me what's going on. And then at that point, if they say, I need medical, I need fire, then I have to transfer them to somebody else, and then all those questions are being asked again. So there is a massive delay there.
Time.
But the thing is, I will say, I do cheat it a little bit, because I work the midnight shift, so I'm able to gauge by the way somebody is speaking on the phone. I can understand possibly what they might be going through, if it's more of a medical, if it's more of like a super crucial, like my house is being broken into. Like I can gauge by the tone of their voice.
Yeah.
So as a dispatcher, I'll ask for the address, and I have, which most centers do, they have this system called Intrado, that's their phone system, and I'm able to look up and I can see their phone number. So I'll just verify the last 4 of their phone number, because a lot of times even in a panic mode, people don't remember their own phone
Correct.
numbers.
They don't.
And they don't, or they'll be
Or
like,
they-
I don't know what phone I'm calling
I don't know the
from.
code to open my phone,
Or they're calling from somebody else's phone. So it's complete panic mode for them. And then I also have the ability to look at where that phone pings. So I'm able to, I ask them for the address, and my verification of it is I'm seeing it, like if they say like 53 Conrad, and I'm looking up at the screen, I see 53 Conrad, so I'm able, instead of having them repeat things, because that becomes frustrating for them too.
Yeah.
So I'll say, even with all that, it could take up to 30 seconds to a minute to take in all that information, which that's crucial timing. And then to dispatch somebody, in our town, we only have 4 or 5 officers on at a time, and we have 32,000 residents within our town. So if 4 or 5 officers, if 2 or 3 of them are on a hot call somewhere else, then maybe I might have 2, or they might be on another call. If those
Right.
officers are tied up, then it's not personal by any means,
Right.
but there's something else going on that's like a life-saving
People
incident.
don't realize that, you're going through something, you're calling 911, you're in a panic mode as it is. 911, the callers, you guys are so crucial.
Right.
You're just like standing beside of them, really.
We say it as cops. Like, to me, it's funny because when you see like use of force incidents and people talk about them, well, I want to see the report. I'm like, I want to hear the dispatch,
Right.
because that really dictates how I respond. So yeah, they're super crucial.
So Mary, you had an incident when the person broke into your home several years ago, and you had your phone and you went to call. It's important to know how your phone operates. Like everybody, don't you think everyone should take a minute to figure out how can you call 911 the fastest?
Absolutely, because so I'm old now, and my
Arms
kids
up.
know how to use.
I got a tickle.
So
About to call medical. Now I'm crying. Sorry.
no,
Let me try that again.
it's okay. It's okay. All right. So with my situation, I didn't know at the time that you could press the volume up and the power button at the same time, and then right at the top, swipe over and connect with your
Yeah.
local.
Yeah, I didn't
It'll
know
call
that.
911 for you.
I don't think
didn't
every
know
phone
that.
can do that, can they?
No.
No.
My
it's only
kids knew,
iPhones.
but they withhold information from me because they like to watch me age. So my kids knew. I didn't know that.
struggle is real.
So, but in that moment, I unlocked my phone with swipe up in the face recognition, and then I at the top of because there was a text message that was open. So at the top, I pressed call for whoever I was last texting.
Right, because otherwise you got to get out of that screen.
Exactly.
It's like,
you have to exit out of the text screen, press the call, the phone button, then dial 911. So you're going through and you're...
While you have a maniac standing in
Right.
front of you.
Absolutely.
And then sometimes there's a thing right on the bottom. You don't have to unlock your screen at all anymore.
You just do emergency.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, right.
You're withholding this.
Right. So the moral right now is look at your phone, figure out how to call 911 the fastest.
Now, is it true that, so I was always told that if you have like an old phone that you didn't trade in,
It's supposed to work.
it's supposed to work as well. Because I
would
tell
test
everybody
it.
that if they
Yeah,
have like
yeah.
a safe room,
Yeah.
that phone should be in their safe room, plugged in.
But it
and-
still needs to have signal. So the issue is you still need to have some kind of cellular signal, like in that area.
Right. So if you're in God's country in Maine,
Oh, yeah. I see
Or
what
a
you're
lot of
saying.
times in safe rooms, when people have a safe room in their house,
Like a real safe room.
it's a real safe
Yeah.
room
Yeah.
and therefore does not let that phone signal
Yeah,
in.
Right.
Most people don't have those kind of safe rooms.
I would like to just touch base. So a few weeks ago, AT&T, I'm sure a lot of people experienced this across the United States.
Oh, an outage.
Outage.
Yes.
National
Everybody
outage.
freaked
Wasn't even
out.
regional. So that wasn't just a tower. That wasn't
Yeah.
just local satellite. So there was a full national outage, and our center had issues with people calling 911. Like you were not able
Oh
to call
my
911. You
gosh.
could not reach the police department. So again, being your own first responder, you can't rely on technology. You
Yeah.
can truly
Right.
only rely on your own experience, your own
And-
knowledge, your own education.
Exactly.
Your own skill.
That holds more value.
Again, this show, we don't know who's watching the show, and so they might not understand, what does that mean, be your own first responder? So
You're
let's
right.
talk about that, because
I think you're right. I mean, especially for gun owners, where a lot of gun owners emphasize so much on the firearm, right? I think if you don't practice medical, right, which is the more probable situation for you to have that is non-firearm related. We were in Utah 2 years ago, hiking, or even up in Lake Placid. You're in the middle of nowhere. There's there's nobody there. It is you. Cell phones did not work out there. There was
geez.
no coverage. You could literally drive for like an hour and see one car pass you.
oh my God.
And a bear going over a fence.
Bear going over a fence, first time she saw one.
Why not?
But, what happens when you have a car accident there, right? Or what happens if you just fall and end up getting hurt? I think the first responder thing is being able to treat whatever it is at that time, right? Whether it's some kind of a dangerous situation or a medical.
Right.
And probability-wise, we get so stuck as gun owners saying, there's going to be an intruder in my house. Probability-wise, it's not that problem.
Right.
When you really look at the statistic, it's not.
Right.
Probability-wise, all of us had a medical emergency at some point where we went, 2 years ago, we went out to dinner and I decided to be done. I was taking photos and I fell off a wall and completely shattered my entire elbow, like it just came apart. And, I kind of like put it together and she's like, oh, she's already trying to call 911. I'm like, nope, just go to the hospital. We're close enough. I know where the hospital is. I know this area. But that is a more probable situation than a firearm situation. But we spend so much time in this realm.
Right.
But it's getting better now. I will say stop the bleed classes and things
Right.
like that have gotten a lot better.
So training is key. So we got CPR, we got all these different stop the bleed programs, which
the Heimlich maneuver,
Yeah,
something
it's
so
huge.
simple.
They have that
Right.
pump now for kids,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
a little
What happens if
saw
a
that.
woman's pregnant? Like, these are things that people just are like, we're going to call 911. You don't have to, there's not enough time for that.
and so I think as gun owners,
Right.
we are already in that mindset.
Yeah,
That's just one of our, and especially being trainers,
Right.
So we're in that mindset.
right.
But
And I'm looking at the banner for Women for Gun Rights, and I'm thinking of all the programs, the national programs that we promote that are effective, that have good outcomes in different communities. And I think of Faster Saves Lives in the school systems. I think of Sandy Hook. I think of how horrendous that day was and how many of those kids didn't die from the gunshot, they died from bleeding out. So if those teachers had the ability, had the skill, the knowledge to stop the bleed, because Martin, you can attest to this, just because you call 911, they're not running in until it's safe to do so.
Yeah, so a lot of those incidents have changed how we respond to active shooters, right? There was a model for a while where there had to be 6 of us. Now it's short of certain places, we won't mention recently, that didn't go in, I could say we don't train for that, right? Like, you get there, you're going.
Right.
And morally, as a person, if I have the ability to do that, I go. I don't carry a firearm well, let me rephrase that. I carry a firearm all the time off duty because I feel I have a social and moral responsibility to do so, because I know I can intervene. We were getting on a plane one time. I had 2 tourniquets and the thing, and the TSA guy's like, "Well, why do you have 2 tourniquets on a plane?" I'm like, "Because we're on a plane." Like,
Right. Because you never know
yeah,
when
like,
you need
this
one.
is a 5-hour flight. Like,
Because you know what a box cutter can do?
Yeah.
It can cut things.
yeah,
And I have my tourniquet.
listen, you could hit turbulence, and I don't know, but I'm saying is is it illegal? You thought it was an odd thing, and I thought it was odd that they asked me why
No,
do I have
kidding.
this. So I don't, and there's enough knowledge out there in statistics now that we know those things. A faster response to anything, whether it's
Right.
fires, medical, some kind of traumatic incident, saves lives.
Right.
Period. So how do we make that,
Right.
faster? Now, faster meaning we get that communication out, we faster respond, but also once we get there, what does that training look like? I just redid my tourniquet at the department last week. We sat there strapping tourniquets on
I
each
think
other.
that's so awesome.
Yeah.
I wish they had more classes around here for that.
Well, back to the school, they implemented Alice,
Yes.
which Alice is okay, but it doesn't take that next step, that stop the bleed and all of that training,
Right.
and that's what those kids need in
Right.
that situation. Their volume is small, their mass is small, they're
Right.
going to bleed out very fast.
We're already 17 minutes into it, so I want to touch base about the term gun violence.
Okay, wait, can I ask my question first? Because I wrote it down and I'm like, I got to ask it, and we're going to run out of time.
Okay, go.
We deal with bills so much, right? We're always dealing with bills. We're looking at gun bills. What's going to be effective, right? We're not just going to pass a bill to make people feel good, right? We want bills that are passed that are going to keep our community safe, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want. We all want safety. So I hear about all these gun buyback programs. Is that something that keeps our community safe?
No, not at all.
Why do you say that?
We have them. First of all, you don't get that many firearms as you would think. They tout it as like gun buy. People are turning in hundreds of guns, and they're definitely not, right? It's usually gun owners that have a firearm passed on to them from a family member.
Right.
They just turn it in for the gift certificate. It's usually older firearms.
Yeah. It's not the bad guy giving.
Yeah, exactly, right. Like
It's never the bad guy.
Correct. Firearms are commodity, and people are not going to give them up. So no, I don't think they're effective, right? And then you hear the stories from other states. It hasn't happened to ours, where smart people went and basically built slam guns or firearms out of Home Depot parts, that cost them $3 and turn them in for the $100
Yes.
gift certificate, 50, 20 at a
Yep.
time. It's entrepreneurship
But I
in a
mean,
way.
geez, you can spend $50 on a magazine. Like my guns that cost hundreds of dollars. So I'm going to turn in a gun that cost me $2,000,
To get
and they're
it,
going to
yeah.
give me $100.
No, and like I said, I have somebody turned in a gun at the gun store. I ended up with it. I transferred it, but it was a police model, and this particular person, their grandfather was a cop. And
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't want it.
Right.
That kind of thing. That's the only people you're going to get at
Right.
those gun buybacks. You're not affecting that at all. Most legislation, if you look at the statistics that are used to push legislation, right? And let's step back one step. It's not gun violence, right? Because an inanimate object cannot do anything, right? We can lay a gun here, and I know it sounds crazy, but it's not going to do anything. It's criminal actors. And what you're seeing is that we're trying to legislate criminal actors with laws that they clearly don't care about.
Right.
Right? Like, we're going to ban open carry. In our state, that was one of the things that got banned was open carry. And I watched the debate, and the person was asked, well, what are you hoping to achieve with that? And they literally just answered, just to ban open carry. And they said, well, has there been any crimes committed? Well, no. Not that I'm aware of, but this is the problem. That
Did it
people-
pass?
It did, it passed. It did. So when you look at those particular statistics that they use to drive that, right, which is homicides or shootings, they are not committed by gun owners. I could tell you that from experience. I work in what would be considered mostly, one of the big 3 cities, and fairly dangerous. And I can maybe name you maybe 2 shootings done by a permit holder that were, one was a homicide and one was an act of self-defense.
And they're not,
And we're averaging 20 to 30 a year. So I mean, I have a pretty good amount
you're
of
not
data.
going to hear that, too.
No,
You're
of
not
course
going to
not.
hear that somebody saved themselves
No.
with a gun. You're not going to
Correct.
hear all
Well,
the truth.
Mary's statistic probably never made it anywhere because she
it's
never
preventive.
fired her
Correct.
firearm. She just pointed it and said, stop, and he did.
Right.
Yeah, it's a preventive
Yeah,
measure.
sorry.
So those kinds of things don't. You look at the new statistic that just recently came out from CDC showing that firearms are the leading cause, and I love how certain groups frame this, of children. When you look at the study, well, first of all, it makes it sound like people are just going around, killing children, which clearly is not true.
Right.
But when you look at the study, the age group they studied was between 1 and 19. The upper, number is between like that 15 and 19-year-old range. When you look at the average statistic of, firearm usage by teenagers, it has risen 50% in 2 years. So of course, and they said, well, it surpassed car accidents. It did by 400, absolutely. But the problem is when you're looking at it is you have to identify what kind of violence it is.
Right.
This is not, we're not.
These aren't accidents.
Correct.
These
Right.
aren't
Correct.
kids accidentally getting
Correct.
into their mom's
Right.
drawer shooting themselves.
Correct.
That's not what's
Yeah.
happening. And that's what these groups make it look like.
Correct. And in that same 6667 bill in Connecticut, there was an adjoining bill which was seeking to up the sentences on, for example, repeat gun offenders. And it was fought by one party. They did not want it to pass, and it didn't. Which doesn't make
Why
sense.
don't you want to hold criminals accountable?
Yeah,
Wait a minute, hold on, wait, let me get, so we don't want to hold criminals accountable, but we think that passing more gun laws is going to make our communities
Correct.
safe?
So we currently, depending where you look at, we currently have somewhere over 20,000 gun laws. Why don't we just use the gun laws we have, right? And I'll give you Connecticut as an example. A lot of states that have a mandatory minimum for time for gun offenders, right? It'll say
They get dropped.
5 year, well, not even that. It'll be 5-year mandatory min. But how that works is they'll plead it out and they'll say, well, it's 2 years to serve, 3 years probation. That counts as the 5. But then
right.
if it's a non-violent offense, if they were just carrying the firearm, they'll realistically serve 6 to 8 months, get paroled out, and then spend the rest of that time on parole. So when people hear this, like, oh, they're not serving that time.
Right.
So how many of those people on parole commit a crime while they're on parole?
Good luck getting that statistic.
Right.
It's extremely hard
But
to find.
repeat offenders are
Correct.
high.
I mean,
It's-
listen, when you look at anything, right, the easiest way to predict future actions is to look at, previous actions, and I think that's important. And crime in itself isn't a gun issue.
Right.
It's a socioeconomic issue. And it's kind of weird to me when you look at what they currently talk about. Well, one of the indicators of whether, you have the possibility of going into that lifestyle is education. Well, why don't we spend the money that we spend on gun legislation on education?
Right, how
Exactly.
about the gang
Exactly.
violence, right? We take these kids, these inner city kids, we're talking about socioeconomical issues and inner city kids, gang violence, drives the number up for crime with guns, and
Sure.
it's these kids getting involved in gangs at a young age,
Yeah,
at
because
10
they're-
years old, younger than that
Because
sometimes.
they're being,
Well, I think one of the big impacts, and I think people don't realize, one of the big impacts on violence overall is social media.
right.
Right, I came from the era, like, if me and you were gonna have a fight, like 10 people knew about it. I had to get my bicycle, ride it to the other side of town, right? Like me and my friends, we had to find you at a park, we'd have a
Right.
fist fight. When you think about it nowadays, with the power of social media, I put something about you on social media, 20,000 people feed that.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Changes. It
Right.
changes the way the kids, deal with those kinds of issues.
Right.
So it is a huge issue, and it's, when we say gang violence, we think of like 90s gang movies. I can't even say it's, for us, it's that. It's just personal.
Violence.
Yeah, personal conflicts that lead to violence. And when you can't arrest your way out of it. I will tell you that. You can't just lock everybody up. That's not going to work.
Right.
You need intervention programs
Right,
that start
correct.
at
So
a younger
like you said,
age.
take that money.
Correct.
Take the
And put it
millions that
towards
you're
the
dumping in.
resources that
Exactly.
we need to provide to these
Correct.
kids that are in the city. to
That's
get
what's
them
going to
away
break the
from,
cycle.
Correct.
That's
from
what's
the
going to break the
negative.
cycle.
Correct. I mean, if you look at, the anti-gun lobby, if they spent that much time focusing on education, we would probably actually make real dents in that statistic.
Right.
But we don't. Like, intervention programs work. I'm super happy to know my department runs the Police Athletic League, the PAL program.
That's awesome.
We kind of like turbocharged it. We had 2 lieutenants take it over.
So what is the PAL program?
So basically what it is it's a community program that's run by the police department that we bring in kids at no cost to do. We have chess, boxing, jiu-jitsu.
That's awesome.
We just started hockey. We're starting basketball next month. And when you look at a lot of the inner cities that do a really good job with dealing with teens, those programs are it. Idle hands do the work of the devil. I mean, we all
That's
know
true.
that, right? So the lack of outreach programs and lack of intervention programs
Right.
is what caught. If you're bored, what are you going to end up doing?
Or you're getting, hanging out with the wrong kids because that's
Absolutely.
what you have right in front of
You've
you.
heard of New Bedford, Mass, right?
course.
I'm sure as a police officer, right? There's so much crime, so much gang violence. When we had the listening tour several months ago,
Yeah.
we went on a series of meetings talking about different bills, different laws, and how they want to reamp it here in Massachusetts. When we got to New Bedford, there was a huge cry for help with these programs. They needed funding. They said, if anything's going to make a difference, it's getting these kids out of the gangs. You got to bust it up. You got it, like you said, idle hands, the work of the devil. Like, you need to have a place for these kids to go.
Right.
I also think that there has to be at some point, which I think community intervention is great, right? But then you also need a fix at home, right?
Correct.
Like,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you could come to a program for 4 hours, you're still going to return to your home situation, right? So the intervention not only has to be on this side, but the intervention has to be on the parent's side. I can't remember the name of the program, but there was one in Chicago that was very successful. And what they were doing is they were forcing the parents to come too.
I think that's great because it's gotta go
Accountability,
full circle.
sure, and
We
responsibility.
got 2 minutes left. I can't believe that went so quick.
I know, it did.
Any final, thoughts and suggestions? And
Yeah, so I will say this. I'm an immigrant.
you're a what?
I'm an immigrant. Like, I'm a border jumper.
Okay.
I was illegal for 6 years. I didn't mention that before, but I think that in anything, here's the issue. Being involved in the legislative process and being aware. Recently I'm at a friend's house. They're talking about the Super Bowl and, this whole Taylor Swift thing and running down statistics of I don't watch sports, so I don't know. But a simple question, I was like, well, who's your senator? They're like, oh, here you go with the politics. I'm like, but see, that impacts your
Right,
life every
right.
day. And I'm not telling you to be hyper aware of politics, but, the legislative process is super important. And I come from a country that didn't have that. So I take it extremely, extremely seriously. So understanding your laws, understanding that you need to vote, understanding that
Yes,
what you're voting for. Don't just read the top of the bill, right? Border security bill.
Right.
Nothing to do with border security, right? 90% of it has to do with, same thing with the gun bills.
Right.
The police, to keep police safe act, nothing to do with keeping police safe.
Right.
So I think that's very, very important. And I think that's the number one thing
Yeah.
I would suggest.
Well, we thank you so much for coming all
Thank
the way
you.
from Connecticut. We really appreciate it.
She makes it seem so far.
I know. But we would love to have you back,
Sure.
and have this conversation because there's so many important topics that we just didn't have a chance to talk about. But
Absolutely.
thank you.
Awesome.
So thank you for joining Sisters in Arms. Again, if you want to send us an email, have questions, concerns, or even a suggestion for a topic for our next show,
Yeah.
sistersinarms2022@gmail.com. Again, stay safe.
And be vigilant.
After that coughing fit.
I had to do that. Bye.